Oregon's quarterback battle could be more serious than you think.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Lots coming today. Spring football questions. Oregon basketball's got its matchup all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So Dan Lanning recently was asked, as spring football has gotten underway, whether or not there's a quarterback battle, and he gave the coach speak answer, which is how it came off to me at first, and I think it's still a little coach speak of sorts, but he basically said, well, every position's a competition, every position's going to be a battle, and that's good for us. You know what? There's some sense to that, right? On the one hand, yeah, that's a non-answer. On the other hand, it could actually be the case that if Dante Moore and Austin Novosad, who are likely the most game-ready quarterbacks going into 2025, if those two guys are able to have an actual honest-to-goodness quarterback battle, I'd be here for it. And you know what? It's not as crazy as it sounds. I think for the last several months, we in the Oregon community collectively, through mostly social media involvement and discussion and fantasizing in our heads, have just locked Dante Moore into being the starter. And guess what? I think there's a greater than 95% chance he winds up being Oregon's starter. But here are two reasons why you should not overlook the idea of Austin Novosad winning a starting quarterback position for Oregon this year, and why I will not, until Dan Lanning says otherwise, say there's a 0% chance. Number one, this is a talented kid. I think it's easy to get latched onto Dante Moore because he was the higher rated guy. Dante Moore is the number 3 quarterback in the class, and Austin Novosad was, oh yeah, that's right, the number 10 quarterback in the class. Not a slouch. Has plenty of talent. Was the biggest standout to me from last year's spring game. He made a couple of mistakes, to be sure. Most young quarterbacks do. But he made some high-level throws. Particularly, if you want to go back and watch the ones that always pop into my head, the downfield shot to Justice Lowe, the back shoulder throw to Jeremiah McLaughlin, the over-the-shoulder ball to Terrence Ferguson, in which T. Ferg uncharacteristically wasn't able to haul in. Those 3 deliveries were high-level, pinpoint precision throws. This is not a guy who Oregon got because, got to have a quarterback in the class of 2023. No, Dante Moore flipped to UCLA. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know Dante Moore would come back to the Ducks after it didn't work out with the Bruins. They went and got Austin Novosad and flipped him from Baylor. Ohio State was also a part of his recruitment because they felt like he was someone who could start for them at quarterback one day. So that's the first reason that I don't want to just completely dismiss the idea that this could be a legitimate quarterback battle. Because I imagine when most of you hear Dan Lanning say, well, it's an open competition and all these guys are battling, you hear he's just saying that because he doesn't want to, there's no upside to naming a starting quarterback right now at the beginning of spring practice. So that's the first part of it. Here's the second part of it that I didn't think about until kind of hopping on to record this show, which is why I do things late at night, because sometimes ideas pop into my head at the strangest hours of the day. Austin Novosad has 2 years studying from a veteran quarterback in Will Stein's system. Dante Moore has 1. Now, you contrast that with what Dante Moore has, that which Austin Novosad does not, and that's real starting experience in the college game. Dante Moore has started against a good Washington State team in 2023, against Utah on the road. He has won games. He got some wins against some G5 teams for the Bruins that year at Oregon State. He's played in some big environments as a starting quarterback. It didn't go very well, but he still has that experience. That's what he has, which Novosad does not. But part of the reason that most of us are looking at Dante Moore and saying, all right, he's a starting quarterback for the Ducks, he's locked into it, it's a done deal, is because he's an incredibly talented guy and because he just got to learn the offense for a year and watch a veteran quarterback operated at a Heisman finalist level. Well, Novosad's watched that happen for each of the last 2 seasons. So the amount of information, when you talk about knowing the playbook and all the reads and details and everything about that comes with being a quarterback, Novosad in theory has a leg up on Dante Moore for this specific offensive system. So that's just something to ponder. And the other quarterbacks in the room, you've got Luke Moga in his second year. Definitely a project as a passer, but is the best athlete of the bunch, and I don't think it's even close. I don't think it's remotely close. Luke Moga might be one of the best physical athletes on the team, let alone just at the quarterback position. And you have Achilles Smith Jr. as well. And then you have Brock Thomas, who's a former walk-on, had a great career, but probably stays in that realm and such. I'd say between the two of them, probably Moga would be more likely to be a surprise starter, but I don't have the expectation that either one of those guys are, going to make a surprise surge. I think if this is, as Dan Lanning said, a legitimate quarterback battle and a starter hasn't been named, yes, Dante Moore should be seen as the front runner in my view, but it's certainly not as close to a lock as Dillon Gabriel or Bo Nix. This is the least secure quarterback room that Oregon has had since Dan Lanning arrived. When Bo Nix transferred in, you knew he was starting. When he came back, you knew he was starting. When Dillon Gabriel came in, you knew he was starting. Didn't matter what happened in spring practice. Didn't matter what you saw in the spring game. That was all just thinking about the future when you watched Dante Moore and Austin Novosad play quarterback last year in the spring game for the Ducks. And just a reminder, this year's spring game is April 26th at Autzen Stadium. So this year, there could at least be, if Austin Novosad goes out and absolutely positively balls, yeah, I bet the staff does give him a serious look. Do I suspect Dante Moore is a little bit more prepared and also has a higher ceiling? Yes, I absolutely do. But, the season Dante Moore had at UCLA is not one to write home about. 9 games played, he completed 53.5% of his passes, 179 yards a game, 11 touchdowns, and 9 picks. This past year for the Ducks, he went 7 of 8 throwing the ball for 49 yards. It was all garbage time minutes. He had one important handoff that he executed, 10 out of 10, 5 stars, against Michigan State when Dillon Gabriel got knocked out of the game for a play. But, Austin Novosad this past season, 11 of 13 throwing the ball, 59 yards. There's not a huge body of work from this past year that we saw. Neither guy had to come in and be, a spot starter because someone was injured. I remember when we thought we might see that in 2022, when Bo Nix was dinged up against Utah and Chris Hudson let slip, oh yeah, well, Ty's going to have to do this. And we were like, wait, what'd you say now? Is he actually going to start? Yeah. Oregon's been able to keep the quarterbacks upright because their offensive lines have been really good. Knock on wood that all of that continues. So I suspect Dante Moore is the significant leader in the clubhouse. Would I tell you right now there's a 100% chance he's a starter this fall? No. More likely than not? Yeah. Definitely looks that way with his trajectory of coming to Oregon to sit for a year and the fact that coming out of high school, they wanted Dante Moore more than Austin Novosad, which is why they had Dante committed first and Austin second. But I'm fascinated to see how this all plays out and if there does seem to be an actual quarterback battle emerge, or if it was just coach speak and we'll look up at the end of the day at the spring game and go, yep, Dante Moore is significantly better. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. Questions for Oregon in spring football. They're all over the place. First, this episode brought to you by Factor Meals. Eating healthy doesn't have to be complicated. With Factor, you get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Factor meals arrive fresh, never frozen, and with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, you can customize your menu to fit your goals, whether that's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Convenience meeting nutrition. That sounds like a combination we can get behind, like Dante Moore to Dakorien Moore. These are all just great combinations, and Factor is here to give you the convenience and nutrition part, not the Dante Dakorien Moore connection. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code factorpodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. And Supply House brings you this episode of Locked On Ducks as well. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast, just like the Big Ten Conference. Los Angeles to Piscataway, same coast. Supply House delivering to all of those spots. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. One of you was distraught in the comments the other day that you didn't physically see here on YouTube, the second segment sip. It's always there, whether you see it or not. I could say that about a number of things in life. It's always there. It's always there. I assure you. I assure you. So, my Locked On Ducks Insiders, which you can become as well, free 14-day trial with a link in the description below. You get priority mailbag access and a bunch of other perks as well. Send in a bunch of great questions that I'm continuing to roll through here going into spring football. This has been a popular one for spring football questions as the Ducks get underway. They've had one or two practices at this point. And one of the ones that comes up is whether Jurrion Dickey plays a role in the offense. 5-star wide receiver recruit, one of the 20 highest rated recruits ever in the history of Oregon football. He's never seen the field. Never has. Okay, that's an exaggeration. You get the point. In a meaningful capacity, Jurrion Dickey has not seen the field. Coming out of high school, 6'3", 210 pounds, number 22 overall player in the country. He was a riser. Plenty of Oregon players like Aiden Breland or Mateo Uiagalelei, or I think Tony Cumberland has this as well as the class of 2026, have gone from 5-star status down to a highly ranked composite 4-star in 24/7 Sports. There are a lot of different reasons for that happening. Jurrion Dickey was the opposite. He was a 4-star guy, but then he got bumped up to 5-star status because everyone realized this guy's a stud. NorCal kid, and he had a heck of a high school career. Number 2 overall wide receiver according to 24/7 Sports, who at 6'2", 6'3", ran a 4.58 40-yard dash. Now, a lot got made of Tez Johnson running a 4.55 40-yard dash. That's because Tez Johnson is very, very small. And for a guy that small, you typically run faster at the NFL Combine. But for Dickey, being a bigger-bodied guy, to run a 4.58, not bad. Not bad. 37-inch vertical, had all the traits. Has not made any material impact for Oregon over the last 2 seasons. Now, we learned after the 2023 campaign that was because of an injury, that he was not healthy. He was also, I don't believe, an early enrollee. So he got to campus in the fall, didn't go through spring camp, but was dinged up, didn't really have a real freshman season, and that's what he had this past year. And I don't know if we would have heard by now, seems like we might have, if he was fully healthy the entire time. But he, again, didn't crack the wide receiver rotation. Now, part of that, I believe, is that Oregon is on a historic run as a program for developing elite receiving corps. The last 2 years of wide receivers are the best, and that's going to continue this year too, because even though Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holden aren't there, you've got Evan Stewart back, Dakorien Moore coming in, Gary Bryant Jr. and Justice Lowe as veterans, Kyler Casper still in the room, but Jurrion Dickey's a big question because of the recruiting profile he had coming out of high school. So one of you asked, can Jurrion prove he's good enough to start? I think that comes down to whether or not Jurrion is fully healthy or whether he ever got to be fully healthy. Because sometimes guys get hurt, like Justin Flo, and they lose a step. Justin Jacobs got hurt when he transferred in from Iowa at linebacker, and he was still a solid player, but I think part of the reason he never became the all-conference caliber guy that I and some others might have projected him to be capable of when he came over from Iowa is because he was coming off of an injury. And then he got dinged up at Oregon again, and physically you're just not ever the same. Jeff Bossa this past season, another example. He had a second-team All-Pac-12 season in 2023. He was great this past year. I thought he was solid. But he was never as good as he was the year before. I suspect, this is just my guessing here, but in an educated way, that the injury had something to do with that. So I don't think Jurrion Dickey's lacking the talent. He's still got the same body frame. He's still got the same hands. But does he have the same burst? Does he have the same route running ability? Is he able to get away from corners and create separation? I don't know. But I know that there's turnover in the wide receiver room without Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden in there. It's still going to be hard for him to move up the depth chart. Because if he wasn't able to do it last year, if he wasn't so good last year that he just had to. Now, Will Stein's also talked about him picking up the playbook and that sort of stuff. Maybe someone that just, is a slow developer compared to others. But overall, yeah, I'd say compared to his recruiting profile, he's had a disappointing start to his career. I don't have huge expectations for him. I have high hopes, kind of like the team as a whole. I have high hopes. I don't have high expectations because after 2 years, for this reason or that reason, fair or not, when you haven't been able to even crack your way into the rotation, whereas a guy like Justice Lowe has, and we've seen his potential, which I think is immense, might just be one of those things that never works out. But if he starts popping during spring football, that's just another weapon for whoever the quarterback winds up being. Speaking of weapons, this is another spring football question. Will the Moore ×2 connections live up to the anticipation? Can the O-line gel and sync up prior to Montana State? I'm going to save the second question for tomorrow's show. I got to think on that one a little bit more. Making that adjustment in my notes right now. But the Dante Moore to Dakorien Moore connection could be as dynamic of a connection we've seen since Bo Nix to either Troy Franklin or Tez Johnson. Now, the question that one of you is asking out there is, will it live up to the anticipation? Well, what's your anticipation? What's your expectation? Do you think Dakorien Moore comes in as a true freshman and has a 1,000-yard receiving season? Do you expect him to get 500 yards? Do you expect him to get 800 yards? I think in 2026, if Dante Moore comes back to start for a second year, then that connection, if both guys are healthy, especially Dakorien, hard-pressed to see how that doesn't result in a 1,000-yard campaign. But there have been other examples, down at USC, they brought in this guy, Zachariah Branch, a couple of cycles ago. He had a really good freshman season, but then didn't quite gel, and he hit the portal and went to Georgia now because I've been told that USC really wasn't able to fluidly work him into the offense, and they felt like they were forcing him the ball sometimes. Well, I certainly hope that doesn't happen with Oregon. I hope, either later this year or by 2026, we look at Dakorien Moore, say he's Tez Johnson, but even better. That's what his ceiling is to be that sort of guy, to be the ultimate go-to possession route runner, yards after catch with a little bit of downfield action. That's what his ceiling is. So I'd be curious to hear what your expectations are, all of you, for Dakorien Moore and Dante Moore this year. But you're asking me, will it live up to the anticipation? Well, I expect Dakorien Moore to have somewhere between 500 and 700 yards receiving this year. I think he's more than capable of living up to that right here, right now in year one. So I think those guys are going to form a great rapport. We've seen a couple of snapshots of Dante Moore throwing balls, and a couple of times been to Dakorien Moore. Great. It's a lot different doing it in pads with 22 guys on the field than no pads and 2 guys on the field, obviously. But my expectation is, that connection starts to grow really quick. Every quarterback wants a security blanket, a go-to target. Dakorien Moore can be that sort of guy. I think Tez Johnson was that guy. When Dylan Gabriel was locked in, where was he looking in big spots? Tez Johnson. Big Ten championship game. Who had a big day? Tez. 11 catches, 182 yards, or whatever it was in a touchdown. I think that's where that Dakorien Moore, Dante Moore connection can one day get to. I don't expect it right away, but as time progresses, yeah, I think it'll live up to the hype. Love that question. Send all your spring football questions, and I'll answer them here on the show. We're going basketball next to wrap up today's show. Oregon lost. Is that a problem? First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here. Oregon's a part of it, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. If you think Oregon's knocking off Liberty this week, you can go bet that right over at FanDuel.com. If you think the Ducks are making a run to the Final Four, if you've got faith in that man Dana Altman aligning a Rubik's Cube in March, then guess what? That's all going to be available for you to bet upon over at FanDuel or whoever you think is making a run this March. It's easy and fast. The FanDuel app, it's simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com, get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, so Oregon lost. Yes, I would have liked for them to have gone on a big winning streak, gotten a higher seed, easier first round game. They've got the 12-5 matchup on Friday, 10:10 Eastern in Seattle, Climate Pledge Arena. Get your butts to Seattle. Get up there, making a home environment for the Ducks. Is this a problem that they lost the game? Has their momentum been thwarted? Absolutely not. Do I feel as good coming off a loss going into the tournament? No, because there's, a loss and you have to realize, okay, so they've got to fix a couple of things, which they do. But everything in this game against Michigan State was working against Oregon. Couple of things. 3, as a matter of fact. First of all, Michigan State's really good. They are a 2 seed in this tournament, and with good reason. They are a really good, deep basketball team. Reason number 2. It was a de facto home game for Michigan State. Not as much as it was for Indiana, but you heard that crowd if you were watching on Friday morning. That was a Michigan State crowd, and Oregon went into East Lansing, almost won once. They had a great half, couldn't put 2 together, unfortunately. But the third thing that really gives me confidence here, still, after Oregon lost this game, in their ability not just to win a couple games, but to make a run in this tournament. Again, I think Oregon is an incredibly low floor team, very high ceiling. They have got wins over Alabama, 2 seed, Texas A&M, 4 seed, Wisconsin, 3 seed, Maryland, 4 seed, and Oregon is a 5. No reason they can't go to the Final Four. I'm going to talk more about the draw they got in their bracket tomorrow, but I feel great about the fact that Oregon was competitive throughout the game with Michigan State when they were playing essentially a road game, and they were playing the second day in a row. Because remember, they played Indiana on Thursday, beat them, and unfortunately for my guy Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers, knocked Indiana out of the tournament. If Indiana beats Oregon one of the 2 times they've played, well, Indiana's probably in because they were one of the first 4 teams out, but Oregon's not running a charity here, neither's Michigan State. So Michigan State wins 74-64. They went on to lose in the next round in a tight one to Wisconsin. But when I looked at that Oregon game, I felt about as good as I could coming off of a loss because Oregon was playing their second day in a row, tipping off at 9 a.m. Pacific time. By the end of that game, Oregon looked gassed. They were tired. They weren't able to dig in and get stops late in the games as they have been so prone to do throughout the course of this year and really over Dana Altman's tenure. They couldn't find those moments. They didn't look like they had their legs fully under them. 4 of 19 from beyond the arc. Oregon's not a great three-point shooting team. They're not 4 of 19 bad. That's 21%. Shellstad alone was 0 for 5. That's not going to continue. I'd take the over if you gave me a Jackson Shellstad prop of his points per game average this year, which is about 13. Against Liberty on Friday, I'd take Shellstad over 13.5 points. Absolutely. I expect to bounce back there. But Oregon had those things working against them, and they were still competitive with a team that is really good. Michigan State can make a run to the Final Four, and so can Oregon. because the Ducks aren't going to be playing the second of a back-to-back against a rested team that's really good ever again. They play on Friday. If they win, they'd play on Sunday against the winner of Akron and Arizona. Again, I'll talk more about the bracket draw tomorrow on the show. But I was as encouraged from a loss as you could possibly be. So when Oregon had lost 5 straight, when they went to Ann Arbor to play Michigan and East Lansing to play Michigan State, they lost both games, but they scored in the mid-70s in both. You know, they had the 50-point first half in East Lansing, and they put up, I think, 74-75 against Michigan a couple days before. And I thought, you know what? Michigan won the Big Ten tournament, by the way. I thought to myself watching those games, boy, the offense looks like it's really settling in. And if they can figure out how to play more consistent defense, they're going to really have something. Well, they did. They won 8 straight, then they lost here to Michigan State. But still, they were competitive start to finish. Yeah, Michigan State had their moments where they pulled away a little bit, but Oregon was down 10 at the half, and they came out. They went on an 11-2 run, which is exactly what they needed. They got it down to 1, and then Michigan State responded, and by the end of the game, Oregon was out of gas. And I don't think this is a situation like last year where, Oregon ran out of gas because they only had 2 guys essentially that were carrying them all the way. I like Oregon's depth a lot. The rotations have definitely tightened up a bit. You're not getting a ton of minutes or production from Supreme Cook or Raheem Moss right now. Moss hasn't been a huge factor all year, but Supreme Cook has seen his role dial back, and Dana's leaning on the starters very heavily. That tends to be what coaches do, tighten the lineups a bit and rotations and figure out these are the guys that I trust the most. And, KJ Evans is Oregon's best bench player right now. But going forward, I don't think Shellstad's going 0 of 5 from 3. He got a bunch of great looks, too. He just wasn't knocking him down. Just had an off day. Probably playing back-to-back 9 a.m. Pacific time games. Not a super easy thing to try and navigate there. So Biddle ended this game. Nate Biddle did everything he could to keep Oregon in it. After going quiet offensively against Indiana and letting everybody else take control, he had 7 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists in that game. Biddle had 22 points and 11 rebounds with 2 block shots. He was 1 of 3 from beyond the arc and 9 of 15 from the field. Dude's a beast. And TJ Bamba had 11 points. He was the only other Duck in double figures. And I have been really encouraged by what we've seen from TJ Bamba. The last 2 games, he had 17, I think it was, against Indiana, 11 against Michigan State. Those are a pair of tournament caliber teams. I know Indiana didn't get in, but they were on the bubble. And TJ Bamba has figured out, you know what? I'm not hitting threes at the same clip I used to. I need to force my way inside and not take more than 3 triples in a game. I don't care if he hits all of them or misses all of them. Ideally, he has the sort of game he had against Michigan State or slightly better. He turned the ball over 5 times. Oregon's got to protect the ball better. Holy smokes. They have put butter on their hands or grease or something over the last 2 games. They could not hold on to the ball against Michigan State or Wisconsin. But Bamba was 1 of 3 from beyond the arc, meaning on 2-point field goals, he's 4 of 6. And in the previous game, let me pull it up real quick, against Indiana, he again was incredibly efficient when he gets inside the arc because he is 6'5". He's a 4th or 5th year senior. He is incredibly strong. He's hard to move. He can get to his spots. He finishes really well with both hands, and he has great touch. Against Indiana, I thought it was his best game of the year. He had 17 points. He only took 1 3-point shot. He was 6 of 9 from the field. 5 of 8 and 4 of 6 on 2-point field goals in the last couple of games. When he's taking good shots, the offense is better. And when he's taking good shots, he gets more engaged at the defensive end, and Oregon's stronger at that end of the floor as well. So, despite the loss, I like where Oregon is at. I think their offense, putting up 64 points when you have an off night shooting the ball from 3, and Shellstad can barely hit the broadside of a barn, great sign against a team of Michigan State's caliber. You bring that into the NCAA tournament, I like where they're at. I'll talk more about that on tomorrow's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.